where we begin talking about our country first. Our country first. No matter what. This is where we begin to talk about things like manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is a great example of nationalism. Manifest destiny was the idea that the United States needed to occupy all the land from sea to shining sea, that we needed to take over control of everything from the Atlantic, where we started, all the way to the Pacific. But what was the problem? There were already other nations occupying that land. We forget about that. We talk about, oh, well, there were some Indians. No, there were Indian nations occupying that land. And so I talk about this as an example of what nationalism, the Trail of Tears. Anybody familiar with the Trail of Tears? See, this is nationalism at its worst. This is where we exclude other nations. This is where we hurt other nations. May 28th, 1830, the Trail of Tears began when President Andrew Jackson signed Senate Bill 102, the Indian Removal Act. That legislation forced primarily 5 Southeastern indigenous nations, including the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, as well as the Fox, Kickapoo, Lenape, Miami, Omaha, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Sauk, Shawnee, and Wyandot, along with a few other smaller ones, to trek up to 2,200 miles on foot from as far away as Florida to what is now known as Oklahoma, where the government's newly created so-called Indian territories was established. They forced other nations off of their land and to walk by foot all the way from places like Florida all the way to Oklahoma. And many died along this journey. And they were resettled in land that the United States government at that time believed was useless. They would be moved again as soon as they found oil fields under their land, because that's nationalism. This is a picture representing the Trail of Tears. And the question is, do we have a right to do that? Because our nation first. See, does this not fly in the face of what Jesus taught? To love our neighbors. This is nationalism. This is an old advertisement that appeared in the newspapers in the 1800s, to be sold, Negroes. This is our nation first. We need cheap labor. We need cheap labor to work our huge plantations so that economically we can not only survive but thrive. And so we will enslave another nation. This is nationalism. Our nation first, to the exclusion or detriment of other nations. And other nations from the countries where we took the Negro slaves were destroyed. This is nationalism. America first, America for whites. See, all too often what happens is nationalism, you have to find something that's going to bind, quote, the nation together. And all too often it's race. That, well, only the people of this race make up this nation. Our country first, and anybody, other people who oppose our country become the enemies. You criticize our country, you oppose our country and its policies. No, we do not want you coming here and colonizing. Oh, well, they're our enemy. But then comes the worst question of all. Who's really part of our country? See, that's a question that pops up in nationalism. Who's really part of our country? We call that ethnic nationalism. This is one of the things that will oftentimes bind nationalism together. We pick a race and we say, well, these are the people who really are part of our country.